My name is Whitney Cole, and I'm 29 years old. The night I told my family I was pregnant, my own mother came around the dinner table and swung her fist into my stomach, screaming that the first grandchild belonged to my sister. I was 11 weeks along. I spent that night in an emergency room watching a heartbeat flicker on a screen and learning what my own hands do when they shake. But here's the thing, the blow isn't the part that broke my mother. The part that broke her was the doorbell. 20 minutes after she hit me, and the woman standing on my parents' porch wearing my face. What happened after that ended up in front of a judge, and what my mother offered me in that courtroom, in front of everyone, was crueler than the fist. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where family secrets come to light, and quiet strength wins the day. We tell stories about people who found the courage to break patterns that were older than they were. If stories like that speak to you, drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe, because this one goes deep. In my mother's house, every morning began with an inspection. She'd stand at the bottom of the stairs with her coffee, and my sister Chelsea and I would come down, and my mother's eyes would travel over us the way a jeweler's eyes travel over stones. Fast, expert, sorting. Chelsea got adjustments, a bow retied, a collar smoothed, a strand of hair tucked with 2 fingers and something that looked like tenderness and functioned like maintenance. I got a glance. One pass, top to bottom, and then her eyes would move on to the day's real business, and I would stand there in the hallway feeling like a package that had been weighed and marked postage due. There was a tape measure in our kitchen drawer. Sunflower yellow. Every Sunday night, my mother measured Chelsea's waist with it and wrote the number on a notepad shaped like a wedding cake. She never measured me. For years. And this is the part I want you to sit with, because it took me 2 decades to understand it. For years, I thought not being measured meant I was free. It wasn't freedom. It was discovery. You don't measure what you already know, isn't it? I learned to read my mother's letter with arms to the sky, the tightness of her jaw, the exact which I heard maybe 5 times in the house. That's is My mother makes the most sense when you stand in her store. Sandra's Bridal opened in 1998 on Main Street in Corvin, Indiana, and it is, I'll say this plainly, beautiful. My mother has a genuine gift, and the shop is her cathedral. Cream carpet, gold mirrors, a wall of white dresses lit like relics. She was Miss Harlan County 1986, and the sash hangs framed behind the register, and brides drive in from 3 counties because being dressed by Sandra Renner still means something. Chelsea modeled for the shop from the time she was 6. Junior bridesmaid dresses, flower girl catalogs, later the sample gowns. She has our mother's face, and I mean that almost literally. The same cheekbones, the same wide-set green eyes, a resemblance so strong that strangers found it charming and I eventually found it ominous. I worked there too, in the back. Unboxing inventory, steaming tulle, invisible. I was 9 years old, crouched behind a rack of veils, the day a customer cooed over Chelsea twirling on the pedestal and asked my mother how she got so lucky. My mother laughed her public laugh and said, "Oh, we work at it. In this family, pretty is the rent." The whole shop laughed with her. I remember going still back there among the garment bags, doing the math a 9-year-old does silently and forever. If pretty is the rent, I was behind on payments. I had, by the family's accounting, the wrong face, and when I once asked my mother whose face it was, since it clearly wasn't hers, she looked at me a beat too long and said, "Not from my side," and her mouth closed like a drawer. Hold on to that. It matters more than anything else in this story. My father, Alan, is a pharmacist, and for 20 years he worked the night shift by choice. I understood why long before I could have said it out loud. Our house at 7 p.m. was a stage with one director, and my father had found the only exit that didn't require a scene. He loved us in the quiet tenses. There'd be a slice of pie left in the fridge with a sticky note in his small print. My bike chain, snapped on a Tuesday, would be whole by Thursday dawn, and no one ever saw him fix it. When my mother's inspections went long and sharp, he would materialize in the kitchen doorway with his keys, ready for work an hour early, and sometimes his being there took the electricity out of the room, and sometimes it didn't. And either way he left. I want to be fair to him, and I want to be honest, and those are two different assignments. He never raised a hand, never raised his voice, never once joined in. He also never stood in front of me. He was present the way furniture is present, solid, warm-colored, and no help. One thing, though. When I was 12, I came downstairs at midnight for water and caught him at the kitchen table with his tackle box open, the old green one with the locking compartment. He was sliding an envelope into it. Red and blue airmail edging, a looping hand I didn't recognize. He saw me see it. He didn't explain. He just looked at me for a long moment and put one finger to his lips. And I nodded, because keeping quiet was the family trade, and I was raised in the shop. I didn't learn what was in the tackle box for 17 more years. It arrived at a dinner party instead. I got out the way a lot of unphotographed daughters get out. I became useful somewhere else. Nursing school in Indianapolis, then a pediatric unit back in Fort Wayne, and I found out that hospitals run on exactly the skill my childhood had drilled into me: noticing. Nobody on a PIDS floor cares what your face is doing. They care that you caught the fever spike at 2 a.m., that you heard the change in a baby's cry from the hallway. For the first time in my life, being watchful was worth more than being watched. I met Ben Cole when his ancient Corolla died in the hospital parking lot at the end of my double shift, and I diagnosed his battery the way I'd have read a chart, and he asked, over the jumper cables, whether I was this calm about everything. He's a high school science teacher. He laughs with his whole chest. He keeps a list on the fridge titled "Things Whitney Was Right About," and when he met my mother, she assessed him in one jeweler's pass and pronounced him sweet, which in Sandra means no resale value. We married in 2023, small, outdoors. My mother came, wore beige, bride's mother's privilege, cheerfully violated, and told the photographer, within my hearing, that my dress was off the rack, but Whitney's always been practical. I let it slide off me. I'd had 26 years of conditioning and one glass of champagne. But here's the detail I keep. During the toasts, my sister Chelsea reached over and held my hand under the table, held it hard, too long, like someone gripping a railing. I thought she was being sentimental. I didn't know yet that the golden child was white-knuckling her own life. Because here's what being worshipped in my family actually cost. Chelsea was 33 and had spent 3 years and 4 rounds of IVF trying to produce what my mother had publicly, repeatedly, giddily named the first Renner grandbaby. My mother had paid for 2 of those rounds, announced it at Easter the way you'd announce a sponsorship, and my mother's money never came without a leash. She kept a countdown, out loud, at family dinners. By next Christmas, God willing, there'll be a bassinet by that window. She referred to my sister's future child, more than once, as the next face of the shop. I watched it and, to my shame, mostly felt the old dull relief of the unmeasured. At least the spotlight isn't on me. Then one afternoon I saw the wiring under it. I'd driven Chelsea to her clinic in Fort Wayne. Paul, her husband, had a work thing, and my mother met us at the entrance, and before my sister went in, our mother took her by the shoulders, kissed her cheek, and said, smiling, at a volume only the 3 of us could hear, "Don't disappoint me again, sweetheart." Again. I sat in that waiting room with my paperback upside down in my lap, doing new math. Chelsea wasn't the lucky one. Chelsea was the franchise. Her body was a product launch running behind schedule, and the woman we both called Mom was the investor getting impatient. I remember thinking, clinically, nurse-brained, if a 5th round fails, someone in this family is going to get hurt. I just assumed, because the spotlight had never once swung to me, that it wouldn't be mine to absorb. 8 weeks later, 2 pink lines showed up on a test in my bathroom. Ben cried first, sitting down hard on the bathroom floor with his back against the tub, laughing and leaking at the same time, saying, "Okay, okay, okay," like a man counting something precious. I stood there holding the test and felt the two feelings arrive together, holding hands, the way they always do in my family, pure joy and threat assessment. Because I knew what this was. This wasn't just our baby. This was, by the accounting of a woman on Main Street, an unauthorized product, the first Renner grandbaby, gestating in the wrong daughter. So I planned the announcement the way I plan a med pass, carefully, defensively, in writing. We waited past the first ultrasound, strong heartbeat, 11 weeks, a blurry gray bean I could already see Ben's chin on. We waited past my mother's birthday because tributaries must never compete with the river. I chose a Sunday dinner at my parents' house, full table, Dad home, Chelsea and Paul there, because witnesses had always made my mother gentler. The audience was her leash. I even scripted the pivot, I swear to you. I wrote it on an index card. The minute the news lands, redirect to Chelsea. And we can't wait for this baby to have a cousin right behind it. I prepared for tears, for coldness, for the spotlight swinging at me like a boom on a sailboat. I prepared for everything, except the one thing I couldn't see. 3 hours before that dinner, while I was still deciding between two cardigans, my mother's phone rang. It was Chelsea, calling from the clinic parking lot, and it was about round 4. And it was not good news. I knew something was wrong before I had my coat off. Reading that house is my first language, and every instrument in it was reporting weather. Chelsea's eyes were swollen under fresh concealer, and Paul sat close to her with his arm along her chair back, less like affection than like a guardrail. My father was home. Sunday was his one guaranteed dinner, and he was carving the roast with the particular thoroughness he uses when he wants a job that requires looking down. And my mother was radiant. That's the tell that took me years to decode. My mother's brightness runs inverse to her weather. She was pouring wine and complimenting everyone's posture and telling a long, sparkling story about a bride from Decatur, and her fork and knife touched the plate with about 1 millimeter too much force. Click, click, like a metronome set to something coming. Every childhood alarm I own was ringing. I actually found Ben's knee under the table and squeezed it. Our signal, developed for exactly this dining room, meaning hold, not tonight. But Ben had spent 11 weeks carrying a secret the size of a sun, and he was proud of me, and proud people are flammable. When my mother turned her bright beam on us and said, "And you too, you look positively lit up. What is going on over there?" Ben's hand was already lifting his glass, his smile already breaking open, the words already leaving him. "Well, actually, we have some news." I watched it happen the way you watch a glass tip off a counter, too far to catch. Chelsea's swollen eyes came up. My father's knife stopped, and my mother's face did something I had never seen it do in 29 years. It went perfectly, completely still. "I'm pregnant," I said, because the sentence was airborne whether I liked it or not, and it was mine to land. 11 weeks. We heard the heartbeat Tuesday. For half a second, the room held its breath, and then it broke in the wrong order. Chelsea moved first. My sister, who had gotten the worst phone call of her 4th failed round that very afternoon, stood up, came around the table, and hugged me. Hugged me first, before anyone, her cheek wet against mine, and she whispered, "Oh, wit." And the whisper had a crack straight down the middle of it. Grief and gladness fused so tight even a nurse couldn't have separated them. I will love her for that hug until I die. My father set down the carving knife and gripped the table's edge with both hands, and his eyes were shining, and he looked at me. At me, not at his wife first. believe what was already happening. She grabbed my shoulder with her left hand. Low, deliberate. Where the baby was, screaming, "Get rid of it!" The room froze. My mother was looking down at me. Hands over my stomach. Deep, silent, frantic man about 11 weeks and head burned from west to For 1 second, something like horror crossed her face. I replayed it 1,000 times. The sentence. She had my face. Not resembled. Had. My jaw. My wide-set eyes. My too strong chin that no one in the family albums ever matched. 30 years ahead of me on a stranger standing on my parents' welcome mat. From the floor, still folded around my baby, I stared up at her like she was a mirror that had learned to walk. And my mother went white. All of it, at once. The color leaving her face like water leaving a sink. And then she began to shake. My mother, who had just thrown a punch, who ruled every room she'd ever entered, stood trembling behind Paul's arms as if the porch light had reached in and touched her. The woman looked at the scene, the overturned chair, me on the carpet with my arms around my middle, Sandra shaking, and read it, all of it, with one slow pass of the eyes, a jeweler's pass. When she spoke, her voice was low and level and aimed at my mother like a flashlight. "Hello, Sandra. 36 years, and it's still the same show." A beat. "Who gave you permission to touch that girl?" My father said hoarsely, "Whitney, this is your Aunt Renee." And that was the moment I felt something warm on the carpet beneath me and realized I was bleeding. The next 6 hours I know by heart because they're charted. Fort Wayne, the ER where I've delivered handoffs 100 times, except now I was the one on the bed, wearing the gown, watching the monitor from the patient's side, which I do not recommend to anyone in my profession. You know too much and too little at once. The bleeding was light, and it stopped. The ultrasound came up, and there, gray on gray, was the flicker. Heart rate 164, steady as a metronome. Mine was 118. A small subchorionic hematoma, the OB said. A bruise, basically, between layers. Watch it, rest, 48 hours of taking it easy. Come back if anything changes. At 11 weeks, the uterus still sits low, shielded by the pelvis. Her fist had bought a bruise and a night of terror, and had missed, by anatomy's mercy, everything that mattered. I lay there doing gratitude math with shaking hands. And then Dr. Okonkwo pulled up the stool and her voice went into a register I recognized because it's the one I use. "Whitney, I have to ask how this happened. Here is the moment I want you to see." My whole life trained for that question. I fell, the family catechism, worn smooth by 3 generations of women. I could feel the words sitting in my mouth like old coins, and I could hear my mother's voice underneath them. "Pretty is the rent. Don't air the laundry. Family stays in the family." I looked at the monitor. 164. Steady. Somebody in this room could not lie yet, and I was her whole sky. My mother struck me, I said. Closed fist. Once. To the abdomen. Approximately 7:40 p.m. Plainly. In order. Without decoration. Dr. Okonkwo nodded and typed, and the truth went into a chart. And charts, unlike daughters, do not recant. My father came to the duplex the next morning. He stood on the step like a man applying for a job he didn't expect to get, and when Ben let him in, he didn't sit until I told him twice. He'd brought two things: a pan of his own scrambled eggs, which is Allen for I love you, and the tackle box, the old green one. He set it on our kitchen table, worked the little lock, and opened the compartment I'd been wondering about since I was 12. Envelopes. Dozens of them, rubber-banded by decade, red and blue airmail edging, the same looping hand, postmarks from Taos, from Santa Fe, 36 years of Christmas cards from a sister-in-law he was forbidden to mention, every one of them opened, every one of them kept. "Renee," he said, "your mother cut her off in 1990. Total. Photos out of the albums, name out of the house. But she never stopped writing me, one card a year, and I never had the guts to do anything except not throw them away." He turned one envelope over in his hands. "When you called about a Sunday dinner with big news, I got a feeling, and your mother had been wound tight about Chelsea for months. So I did the one brave thing I know how to do, which is make a phone call and not tell anyone." He'd asked Renee, who was passing through Ohio anyway, to come for dessert. Insurance, he'd thought. The only person alive who'd ever stood up to Sandra. He looked at his hands. "I budgeted for a storm wit, not for—" He stopped, and his jaw worked, and then he said the truest sentence of his life. "I thought staying quiet was holding the family together. Turns out I was just holding my seat." Renee came that afternoon, filling our little kitchen with the disorienting experience of watching my own face pour tea. Up close, the resemblance was almost funny. Ben kept looking between us like a man at a tennis match, until she reached into her bag and set a photograph on the table, and then nothing was funny at all. A Polaroid, 1989 by the ink on the border. Two young women in front of a Buick. One is my mother at 21, already lacquered, already posing, smile aimed at the camera like a hood ornament, and she is not touching the other woman. The other woman is 24, in a denim jacket, laughing at something off-frame, and she has my face. Mine. Not close. Mine, the chin, the eyes, all of it, on a woman standing in a driveway 3 years before I'd exist. "That's the last picture of us," Renee said. "I was the oldest, the one who didn't photograph well. That was the actual phrase in our house. Our mother graded us at breakfast, Whitney. Posture, skin, waist. I ate my toast getting scored every morning for 18 years, and I was the rough draft and your mother was the fair copy. So I left. 1990. I was 25. She slid the Polaroid across the table to me. Sandra told everyone I ran off the rails. What I ran was a pottery studio in Santa Fe, but the truth doesn't matter to the show. The show needs a villain and a star. She looked at me then, and her eyes, my eyes, went very soft and very hard at the same time. "You have my face, sweetheart. Don't take her script." I picked up the Polaroid. My hands, I noticed clinically, were not shaking anymore. Keep that photograph in your mind. It goes where this whole story goes. You might think a woman who punched her pregnant daughter in front of 4 witnesses would go quiet for a while. You'd be thinking of a different woman. By Wednesday, my mother had a narrative in circulation, and it was elegant, because her work always is. Whitney had a dizzy spell. Poor thing. First trimester, you know. Took a fall against the table. And now, hormones being hormones, and having always been jealous of her sister, she's telling people something monstrous. She deployed it through the boutique the way you'd run a wire service, to the Altar Guild, the aunts in Ohio, 2 neighbors, her hairdresser. My great-aunt in Dayton texted me a prayer hands emoji and the words, "Please don't tear this family apart over a misunderstanding, honey." A woman I babysat for stopped me at the grocery store, gripped my forearm at the register, and said she was praying for my whole situation, with a little pause before situation, like tongs picking it up. That's how it works in a town where your mother sells every wedding dress within 30 miles. Her version got fitted and mine stood there off the rack. I want you to know what I did about it, because it's the part I'm proudest of. Nothing poison. I needed the impossible witness. I needed the person the whole county believed my mother loved most. We sat with that, both of us knowing the ask was obscene. She's grieving 4 failed rounds. She's the star of the show. She's spent 33 years earning her spot, and it's the only pension she has. I closed the laptop. I can't ask Chelsea to burn her whole life down for me. Ben said quietly, maybe stop deciding for her. Your family's very good at that. And as if the universe had been waiting on its cue, I am aware of how this sounds, and I have the screenshot, time-stamped 1:14 a.m. My phone lit up on the table between us. Chelsea. 3 texts, stacked. File it, Wit. I'll testify. I'm so tired. You have no idea how tired. Time this family heard it from the mannequin. Chelsea came over the next evening, and my sister and I had the first true conversation of our adult lives at my kitchen table, over decaf she kept forgetting to drink. I had spent childhood believing she lived in the sun. She spent it, it turns out, living under a heat lamp. She told me things in a flat, careful voice, like someone unpacking a box they'd taped shut years ago. The Sunday tape measure. I knew about that. What I didn't know, that it never stopped. 33 years old, and our mother still commented on her waist at the shop, in front of brides, with a little laugh that made it hospitality. That Mom had actually scheduled, 2 of Chelsea's embryo transfers around the boutique's calendar because the spring trunk show needed Chelsea photographable, and when Chelsea objected, Mom reminded her, sweetly, who had paid. That "don't disappoint me again" wasn't a slip I'd overheard once. It was a liturgy. "You always thought I was the princess," Chelsea said, turning her mug in circles. "I was the mannequin, Wit. And a mannequin isn't loved, it's dressed. You at least got to be a person back there in the stockroom." I know it didn't feel like that. But nobody ever measured your body for the company. We both cried a little, in the undramatic way of people who don't have spare energy for more. And then my sister, my worshipped, gilded, exhausted sister, picked up the manila folder, read the ER summary all the way through, set it down, and said the thing that ended one family and started another. She hit the wrong daughter, and she's going to call it love. She's been calling it love my whole life. I'll say that to the judge in those words. Let me stop here and ask you something, 1-to-1. If you grew up in a house where love had a scoreboard, where you were compared to a sister or a brother until you could recite your own ranking, tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And stay close, because what my mother offered me in that courtroom is something I'm still not over. Subscribe so you don't miss it. We filed on a Tuesday morning. The petition, the ER records, and 3 witness statements. Ben's, Chelsea's, and one more that I will be proud of until the day I die. My father's. He wrote it at our kitchen table in his pharmacist's print, tiny and exact, and his hand shook worse than his handwriting, and when he signed it, he sat back and said, "To nobody in particular. 35 years married, first time I've testified against her." Then he squared the pages the way I square papers, which is apparently a thing you inherit, and added, "Should have been 30 years ago, before it grew." The court granted the ex parte order the same day. That's how it works in Indiana when there's a medical record and a fresh act of violence. Protection first, hearing within a few weeks, both sides heard. And here is a detail I did not choose and could not have staged. Orders have to be legally served on the respondent, and the sheriff's deputy found my mother where anyone could, at the boutique, on a Saturday, mid-fitting. I wasn't there. I heard it third hand, how she took the papers with a bright hostess smile in front of a bride from Auburn and her whole entourage, thanked the deputy as if he'd delivered flowers, and finished the fitting flawlessly. That's my mother. The show must and did and will always go on. People ask me if that part felt like winning. The papers landing in her kingdom, in front of an audience. It didn't feel like anything so warm. I stood in my kitchen when I heard, one hand on my stomach, doing the only accounting that mattered. 14 weeks. Heartbeat strong. An enforceable piece of paper now standing where my body used to stand alone. I didn't win anything that day. I just, for the first time in my life, stopped losing. The town took sides the way small towns do, quietly, at the level of casseroles and pew placement. Some aunts went silent. A cousin I barely knew sent a card that just said, "Believe you," underlined twice, no signature, which I keep in the fire safe with the records. My mother hired a lawyer from Indianapolis and, in her boldest stroke, put a new sign in the boutique's front window, hand-lettered, facing Main Street, "Family is everything." I drove past it once and laughed so abruptly I startled the dog in the next car. And then there was the phone call I didn't expect. My grandmother, my mother's mother, 84 now, living in assisted care in Ohio, the original owner of the breakfast scoreboard. Renee had visited her, first time in decades, and told her everything. The voice on my phone was thin as onion skin. "Your mother," she said, and stopped, and started again. "Sandra was such a beautiful girl. We made sure of it. We made Sure of it. A long breath, with static in it. I watched my mother do it to me, you know. I thought it was how you raised girls that survive. She didn't apologize. Women of her generation apologize in casseroles and silences, not sentences. But before she hung up, she said, "Don't let anybody weigh that baby but the doctor." And her voice cracked on baby, and that was the closest thing to an amends the assembly line ever produced. I sat with the phone in my lap for a long time after. 16 weeks that day. My nausea was gone, my waist was going, and none of the women who built me had ever once been allowed to feel this unmeasured. The hearing was 11 days out. My lawyer's name is Meg Doyle, 47, courthouse gray suits, a handshake like a door closing, and she prepared me for the hearing the way I'd want a surgeon to prepare. No adjectives, all sequence. Records go in, witnesses go up. The other side gets to cross. Keep every answer inside the question. Then, at the end of our last prep session, she closed the folder, took off her glasses, and gave me the only warning that mattered. Their side has signaled they'll propose a resolution, withdrawal of the petition in exchange for some structured family reconciliation, counseling, supervised contact, language like that. It'll sound reasonable. Courts, like reasonable. And Whitney, she paused, choosing the next part with visible care. It will come wrapped in the thing you want most. That's how these offers work on daughters. I've watched it for 20 years. Prepare yourself now, in this office, because you cannot prepare in that room. I said, "What do I want most?" And I genuinely meant it as a question, which tells you how deep the thing was buried. Meg looked at me for a long moment, not unkindly, the way you look at a smart patient who hasn't read her own chart. "You know," she said. That night I sat on our bed with the Polaroid. I'd started carrying it, the way some people carry saints. And I looked at Renee laughing off frame in 1989 and at 21-year-old Sandra beside her, posed, lacquered, alone in a way I'd never noticed. And I said the answer out loud to the empty room because Meg was right, and I did know. I wanted my mother to say she loved me. 29 years. One sentence. And someone in Indianapolis was, at that hour, drafting it into a settlement offer. The night before the hearing, my mother violated the order to stand on my porch. I know, technically, I should have called it in. Meg half expected me to and never scolded me that I didn't. Because when I looked through the screen door, I saw something I'd never seen in my life. My mother undone. No pearls, no repinned hair. A cardigan, buttoned wrong at the bottom, which for Sandra Renner is the wardrobe equivalent of a scream. 2 minutes, she said. I'll stay out here. And then my mother stood on my doormat under the porch light and told me a true thing, the first one I ever heard from her about herself. My mother weighed me every Monday morning, she said, flat, looking at the porch rail. On the scale in the cold bathroom. Before school, before breakfast. The number decided the week. A pause. The year I was 15, before the county final, she locked the kitchen for 3 days. 3 days, Whitney. I competed dizzy. I won. She framed the sash and hung it where the kitchen key hung. I stood there with my hand on my 16-week curve and felt the ground tilt, because it was real. The wound was real. Is real. And it explained everything, and my whole chest ached for that starving girl. And then my mother lifted her eyes and, with the same breath, cashed it in. So, you know I don't mean the things that happen when I'm wound tight. Withdraw the petition tomorrow. We'll do the counseling, whatever they want. And I'll say it, Whitney. I'll say I love you. I've never said that to anyone. Not your father, not Chelsea. You'd be the first. There it was. The sentence I'd waited my whole life for, quoted to me in advance, like a price. Good night, Mom, I said. I'll see you in court. I closed the door and then I sat down against it, and I cried, because I had come so close to opening it. Allen County Superior Court, 8:40 in the morning, a courtroom that smelled like floor wax and cold coffee. Our side of the gallery filled up in a way I hadn't dared to picture. Ben, in the tie he wears to funerals and job interviews. My father, in his church suit, sitting very straight with his statement folded in his breast pocket like a pass he was afraid someone would revoke. Chelsea, who walked past our mother's table without turning her head, in a plain navy dress I guarantee was chosen for its plainness. The mannequin. Off duty. On strike. And Renee, flown back from Santa Fe on 9 days' notice, sitting on the aisle with her silver hair and my face, as calm as a woman who had been waiting 36 years for a room like this. My mother came in at 8:50 with her Indianapolis lawyer, and she came in the way she enters everything. Chin lifted, camera ready, the county's most beautiful 58-year-old woman, wearing the deep green suit she saves for bank meetings. She swept the room in one jeweler's pass. It snagged for half a step on Renee. I watched my mother see her sister. See the face. The one she'd cut out of the album sitting in daylight where the whole county could compare. And I watched the chin come up another degree to cover whatever had just moved under it. She did not look at me at all. The bailiff said the case number out loud. My case, my name, and my mother's name welded together by the word versus. And the judge, a gray, brisk woman with reading glasses on a chain, opened the file and said, "Let's begin." The evidence went in dry, and dry turned out to be devastating. The ER records on the projector, the intake note, the imaging report, the OB's flat clinical sentences, patient reports being struck in the abdomen by her mother with a closed fist, words with no adjectives in them, which meant no handholds for anyone trying to climb around them. Ben testified in his funeral tie, steady, wrecked, precise. And then Chelsea took the stand, and the whole room leaned a half-inch forward, because everyone in that county knew exactly who she was, the beautiful one, the shop's face, Sandra's girl. She kept her hands folded and her voice level, and she said the sentences she'd promised me at my kitchen table, almost word for word, and I watched them land on the courtroom like weather. My mother didn't lose control. My mother lost possession. My sister had something that was supposed to be mine, because everything about me was supposed to be my mother's. I know how that works. I've been hers for 33 years. A pause, her chin steady. She hit the wrong daughter, and she's going to call it love. She's been calling it love my whole life. My mother's lawyer, to his credit, did not cross-examine her for long. There was nothing in it for him. Instead, at the recess, he approached Meg with the offer we knew was coming, now dressed for court. Respondent proposes withdrawal of the petition in favor of structured family counseling and supervised contact. Respondent is prepared to make a personal statement of reconciliation to the petitioner, here, today, on the record. Meg relayed it to me in the hallway, verbatim, watching my face the whole time with those 20 years of hers. A personal statement, I repeated. Meg nodded slowly. You know what it's going to be. Decide out here, Whitney, not in there. We declined the deal, and the hearing resumed, and Meg called Renee Marsh, and my mother's chin finally came down 1 degree. Renee testified the way she pours tea, level, unhurried, terribly clear. She was not there to talk about the dinner. She hadn't seen the blow. She was there for pattern, and the judge allowed it. And my aunt laid 3 generations on the record in 9 minutes. The breakfast gratings, posture, skin, waist, every morning. Their mother with her coffee going stone cold because scoring took priority. The album purges, the didn't photograph well, the assembly line that turned girls into inventory. And then, quietly, the year my sister was 15, our mother locked the kitchen for 3 days before the county final so Sandra would fit the dress. She competed starving. She won starving. Our mother hung the sash next to the kitchen key. I believe on purpose. Renee looked at her sister, and her voice, for the first time, bent. In this family, pretty is the rent. That was our mother's phrase before it was Sandra's. My sister is the first product of that line, and I am the only escapee. And I want the court to understand I am not here because I hate her. I'm here because I know exactly what she is going to do to that baby, because it is the only thing she was ever taught to do. I looked at my mother during that testimony. I couldn't not. She sat perfectly composed, spine of a pageant queen, eyes shining wet and unfallen. And I watched her, in the middle of her own autopsy, tilt her head 1 degree and check her reflection in the glass tabletop. Both things true at once, forever. The starving 15-year-old and the woman who became the scale. My chest ached and my resolve did not move an inch, and I finally understood that both of those could also be true at once. Before ruling, the judge asked whether the respondent wished to make a statement. My mother's lawyer began to answer, and my mother, for the first time in the proceedings, maybe for the first time anywhere, overrode her counsel. She stood. She smoothed the green suit. She turned, not to the judge, but to me, across the aisle, and the courtroom went so quiet I could hear the ceiling fan tick. Whitney. Her voice caught, and what came through the catch was not performance. I have spent 29 years auditing that voice, and I am telling you, under everything, something real was drowning. I love you, Whitney. There it was, out loud, in public, on a court reporter's tape, in front of her sister and her husband and her daughters. The sentence I had waited for since before I had words to wait with. And she was not finished. I love you, and I have never, I don't say it, because where I come from you didn't get to. Her hand made a small, helpless motion, and I watched her reach the very edge of the truth, the actual edge, closer than she had ever stood to it. And then I watched her step back from it, the way she stepped back from everything real, and land where she always landed. So withdraw this order, sweetheart, and come home, and we will be a family. That's all I'm asking. You get everything you ever wanted. All you have to do is take it back. The Polaroid was in my blazer pocket, over my heart, where a nurse keeps her penlight. My daughter turned. 17 weeks, the first flutters, right on schedule, as if she were rolling over in her sleep to listen. The judge looked at me. Ms. Cole? I stood up slowly, one hand on the curve of my daughter, and I spoke quietly, because I had learned by then that in my family, quiet is the only volume that can't be performed over. I believe you, Mom. Her face lifted, and for one terrible second it was radiant with victory, and I had to say the rest into that radiance. That's the saddest part of this whole room. I believe you love me. Today, here, now that love can buy something you need. That's the only kind of love your mother ever taught you. Love with a receipt. I've watched you my whole life, and I am telling this court the truth. You are offering me the one sentence I have wanted for 29 years, and you are offering it as a price, and I'm not buying my safety with it, because my daughter is listening. I breathed. The fan ticked. Love isn't rent, Mom. Nobody owes you for a face. And then I turned to the judge, and I asked the court to issue the order. 2 years. She granted it in 4 unhurried sentences, with findings, effective immediately. What I remember after that is mostly sound. The gavel, lighter than television. My mother's lawyer murmuring, and my mother rising, gathering her handbag and walking out of that courtroom at pageant tempo, chin high, heels striking the aisle tile in perfect meter, click, 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 the same metronome I'd heard over dinner plates my whole childhood. And not one of us, not her husband, not her daughters, not her sister, received a glance on her way past. The doors sighed shut. That sound, heels departing on tile, is the last sound of my mother I have. I sat down and my legs finally shook, and I let them, because the person they'd been holding up all morning weighed 6 ounces and had my chin. I had just paid for her safety with the only sentence I'd ever wanted, and I want to be honest with you the way this whole story has tried to be honest. It did not feel like winning. It felt like an amputation that saves the patient. It felt like the truth. It still does. In the hallway outside, my family, the elected one, the one that had voted with its presence, closed around me in the fluorescent light. My father hugged me first, and I realized, with my face against his church suit, that I could not remember the last time he had initiated a hug. His statement was still folded in his breast pocket. Unneeded. The records had carried the day, but he kept touching the pocket like a man confirming a passport. 30 years late, he said into my hair. I know, Whit. I know. Chelsea stood back until I reached for her, then gripped my hand the way she had at my wedding. The railing grip, except this time I understood what it was, and I gripped back. So, she said, wet-eyed, attempting our family's native dialect of deflection. I guess I have to learn how to be a sister now. I hear it's like being a mannequin, but you get to move. And Renee took my hand, pressed the Polaroid into it, and folded my fingers over the two young women in front of the Buick. Keep this where you'll see it, she said, my own future face looking down at me, steady as a level. Not to remember what she did, to remember where the script ends. It ends with whoever finally refuses the part. Ben drove us home with one hand on the wheel and one hand on my knee, and nobody said anything, and it was the best silence of my life. My daughter was born in November, 2 days past her due date, 7 pounds even, loud as a fire alarm and completely unharmed. The hematoma had resolved by 20 weeks, exactly as the charts predicted, though I never stopped checking. The waiting room held my whole elected family, Ben's parents, my father with gas station flowers he'd clearly panicked over, Chelsea with a Mylar balloon and the early guarded good news that round 5, the one she and Paul paid for themselves, on their own calendar, with no sponsor, was holding steady at 9 weeks. Renee couldn't fly in until Christmas, so she attended by video from Santa Fe, weeping happily over a kiln. There was no empty chair. We didn't set one. My mother learned about the birth the way the town learns everything, and she responded in her native language. A package arrived via Chelsea, wrapped at the boutique, containing a white newborn gown, silk, exquisite, easily $200. No card with a verb in it, just, blessings, Sandra. I held that little dress for a long moment, and it was soft and beautiful, and it weighed 3 generations. And then I drove it to the hospital's charity closet, where it will dress some baby whose grandmother's love has no dress code. The boutique is thriving, by the way. The family is everything sign is still in the window. Brides still drive in from 3 counties. The county still finds my mother elegant, and it isn't wrong. The machine she was fed to still runs, all lights on, right there on Main Street. It just doesn't run through my house anymore. On my refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like a pie, there are 2 pictures now, a sonogram and a Polaroid from 1989. My daughter will grow up knowing both women. Only one of them gets to hold her. Here is what I know now, 1 year out. Some of us have to grieve a mother who is still alive, and breaking the cycle doesn't feel like victory. It feels like choosing your child's face over your mother's mirror, every single day, starting before breakfast, because that's when the grading used to happen. My daughter has my chin, which is to say, she has Renee's. I hope she keeps it. Nobody here will ever measure it. A yellow tape measure in a kitchen drawer, a Polaroid with my face and a stranger's name, and I love you spoken to a courtroom. That's my story. Now tell me yours. What's the sentence you waited your whole childhood to hear? Put it in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe to Calm Drama Stories, because next week's asks an even harder question. Take care of yourself. That's family too.